Thanks for coming to this District 6 Town Hall. Really quick announcement before we begin. This last Friday, May 3rd, was Vice Mayor Steve Madison's 25th anniversary of being sworn onto the City Council. So we have some certificates from the local elected officials and letters from colleagues and people he's worked with over the years to thank him for a quarter century of service to Pasadena.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Now that's a great field rep there, I'll tell you.
This one from the city.
Thank you so much. Wow. Nice. Thank you. Oh.
Everybody's going to come up and
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Justin. And, well, thank you to all of you. You know, I was first elected when I was 12, of course. So, but I am so grateful, first of all, for all of you coming out tonight on a beautiful spring evening. It's been really nice, cool and crisp in the evenings and starting to warm up during the day, which sort of segues into our agenda tonight. But before we get to that, I'd be derelict if I didn't express my gratitude to the district for my reelection in March. It's good to know when you can defeat none of the above. And I think I've outlived my opposition somehow on the council, but truly it's a great honor to serve on our city council, and the issues are every bit as interesting and challenging, certainly for me today, as they were the day I took office. I was also honored by the council to be elected as vice mayor, so I'm currently the vice mayor. Thank you, David. Thank you. And, you know, with Bill Bogard, for whom I was vice mayor during his tenure, and then now Victor Gordo, being vice mayor is a lot like being the Maytag repairman, you know, because your duties officially are to appear in the mayor's stead when he or she cannot be present for an event. But Bill and Victor are both so good about being there, showing up for us, that it's pretty light duty at the end of the day. Speaking of the elections, we haven't had a town hall this year, I think primarily because of that, because we had the election in March and we were all focused and probably a little overwhelmed by all the mail we received and all of the campaigning and the like. We had 6 of the 8 city council seats up for election in March, and so we'll have at least one new face. Rick Cole will be joining the council in December to replace the current council member from that district. And it's kind of a weird system now that we're with the county, where we have the primary in March and then the general election in November if there's a runoff, and then the terms don't turn over until December. It used to be that we had our local municipal election in March, then a general in April, and then we would be sworn in May, and I certainly preferred that. You know, we'll probably talk again about that in connection with charter reform, which we're undergoing presently, but we don't have as much control as we used to over the timing of those elections. The debate, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on any issue, but on this one, for example, where, you know, the argument is when we're combined with the local and state and federal elections, there's more turnout for the municipal elections. And that's certainly true in terms of just the raw numbers, the quantity. But I fear that there's less bandwidth, if you will, for the voters to actually be really engaged in the local elections when you're also considering county and state and federal races all in the same gulp. So I'm sure reasonable minds can differ, and for the status quo now is that we're combined with the county and state and federal elections, and we will continue to be in March, and then November. It does create kind of a weird situation where, presently, as I mentioned, we have a council member who's been unseated, and not by a close margin in her district, but who's going to continue to serve for 9 months of a term, sort of knowing that. And I don't know that we ever contemplated that sort of thing. We are undergoing charter reform. That's one of the sort of at the top at our town halls. And remember, we're trying to have 6 a year now, so we've got some catching up to do, Justin. But we try to do 2 district-wide town halls and then one neighborhood town hall in each of the 4 quarters of the district. And as we look forward to the charter reform piece, there are a number of issues that will be discussed in terms of election reform, campaign finance reform. Should we have term limits? I used to joke that my family was lobbying for term limits, but I think they've all given up and moved away on their own anyway. So, but it'll be interesting to have those discussions. And I also think the council could use a tune-up in terms of the way that we conduct the business of the city and of the community, in terms of some of our rules of order, if you will, at the council meetings. I think there's always room for improvement about how we conduct ourselves. And I know at times it feels like some of the meetings go longer perhaps than they should, and that we'll decide, not that dollars are the only metric by any means, but we'll spend 2 hours at 7 p.m. talking about a $30,000 issue, and then at midnight we'll spend much less time talking about a $30 million issue for the community. And I think it's always good to do introspection about how we can do that better. We've also been working on, obviously, the 710 stump, which for our district particularly is a central issue for us and has been for decades, and we're slowly moving forward. In his new role, David isn't as involved in that, I don't think, as he was previously, but we all need to be dedicated to moving that along. It's been almost 2 years now since the city obtained title to the stump, and I personally am disappointed with the pace at which we've moved. We need to be deliberative, we need to be thoughtful, but life is a depreciable asset, if you will, and the sooner that we can actually bring a plan forward and get shovels in the ground for whatever that is, the better. So I think that in addition to the city's 710 working group, in which council members had appointments, and then there were additional appointments by the mayor and at large, I have also formed a West Pasadena 710 working group comprised of the applicants for the 710 city group that were not able to be selected because we only had one appointee. And that group has been meeting, and I'm really grateful and impressed by their work. The mayor has also appointed an ad hoc 710 task force, of which I'm a member, along with Councilmember Hampton and the mayor himself, and we're going to try to grab the reins and start to move at a brisker pace here if we can. We are making progress. We have a timeline. We have some consultants engaged and all, but it's time to up the effort there, I think, especially with the elections now behind us. We're in budget cycle now, always an important part of what we do. I think it was Mayor Daley, the elder, who famously said, if you want to see what an organization really cares about, you need to look at their budget. And that's certainly true. We are having presentations now on the operating budget. You think of the budget as being capital improvement, the big capital projects, and then the operating budget. And we have a general fund, which provides most of the operating budget, and then you have the other funds that provide for other things, including a lot of the capital projects. So excited about adopting a budget on time, and the fiscal state of Pasadena is strong and should continue that way as we continue to emerge from COVID and from high interest rates and all the rest. So let me turn, without further ado, I want to remind you this is your meeting. I'll entertain any questions or comments that you have. There should be cards for those that Justin can provide toward the end of the meeting. Also, we have a raffle, and tonight we've got some cool prizes, but you have to be present to win, so please stick around and make sure you filled out a card indicating your name, and so we can identify you if you do that. And it'd be great to add an email address or a cell phone so that we can communicate with you. Before we turn to the program, I want to acknowledge, first and foremost, we care a lot about public safety in West Pasadena. We have great public safety departments in the city, and of course the two sort of flagship are the police department and the fire department. And my friends Tim Sell and Lieutenant Derek Laughlin are here. Can we please express our gratitude to them? Thank you. Also, Meredith Thomas, who does a great job as board secretary and many other roles at the Rose Bowl Operating Company, is here. Meredith, thank you. Also want to recognize a good friend and colleague and important voice in the city. Alan Edson, the president of the NAACP, is here. Thank you for coming, Alan. And of course, a big shout out to the school district and San Rafael Elementary for offering the school site for our meeting tonight. And I'm very grateful that this site will be available for many, many years to come as a working, active school in our school district here in West Pasadena Public School. Thank you. So I want to turn to the topic of the agenda, and that is climate change and what the city of Pasadena is doing. And this is the kind of issue that I often talk about the 3 layers of government as not so much resembling the 3-layered cake that we all learned in junior high and civics, but a marbled cake nowadays, where you see federal, state, and local initiatives working much more closely together. And this issue of climate change obviously is an international, global issue as well. I mean, we're literally talking about an existential threat to at least the way human life is currently as we know it, and maybe even the survival. People talk about saving the planet. The comic George Carlin would joke that the planet's going to be fine. It's just us that may not be around if climate change continues to occur, man-made, if you will, climate change that has caused so many problems. And when you think about fossil fuel, you can sort of skip over the fact that what we're actually talking about is actual fossils of animal and plant life from the millennia that have baked in the earth for so long that they've become carbon, giving rise to sort of petroleum and the other sort of carbon-based energy. So I think the Earth's been around, I'll let the academics correct me on this, but 4 billion years or more. And yet in the last couple hundred years, we've pretty much almost depleted that amount of all the fossils from all the millennia and the carbons and the like. So clearly we have to change, and we are. If you look at, if you buy a Car and Driver magazine on the new models, it's amazing how every new car maker is now coming out with electric vehicles. And of course in California, beginning in 2035, there will be no more sales of new combustion engine automobiles. We'll be looking just at electrical. And we need those kind of big macro changes to really, it's great that we can all recycle and try to use renewables and the like, but it really has to happen at a structural and governmental level to have any chance of real success, given the hole that we're in here. So we've invited tonight some of the top experts in Pasadena, and I would match Pasadena against any community of our size or even much larger in terms of the brain power and the expertise. And I think it's appropriate that we start with our acting head of the Pasadena Water and Power Utility, David Reyes. And as David comes up, I want to first just remind you, David has served in a number of roles in the city as head of planning and permitting, as assistant city manager. and now taken on the task of being the interim director of Water and Power. Very, very important function for the city and for all of us. And you've probably heard about the carbon-free mandate by 2030, which I was a big proponent of, along with others on the council. We essentially directed our water and power to be carbon-free by the year 2030, which is ambitious. It's ahead of the schedule that the state has imposed on us. And it's not easy because those markets are changing, as we speak. And the costs are somewhat volatile and unpredictable and all, but I and the other council members really felt it was important for Pasadena to be not just a thought leader on this topic, but also, an actual leader. And I think we're going to get there, but David is the person that can share with us his perspective as the director presently of Water and Power. So please welcome David Reyes. Thank you. I'll step away.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And I have been with the city about 12 years, and most of those were in the Planning and Community Development Department. The last 2.5 with the City Manager's Office as Assistant City Manager, and about the last 6 months with Water and Power. And one of the things that I've really benefited from on the community planning side is understanding the city's general plan. And one of the city's 8 guiding principles is public engagement. And it's really understanding that we are a public serving body. I think for so many years, the utility, and most utilities, not just ours, but most utilities were very, very much inward looking, and they would deal with customers to bill them or to handle a complaint. And I think that what we've seen drastically in the last couple of years, not just here, but importantly here, is our public, Pasadena 100 and others, our city council provide real policy direction to the utility in a way that really hasn't been done in the past. And I think it's really important that you hear, and I don't mean you hear, but you hear me say that we are absolutely committed to doing our very best to implement that public policy. And it's going to be a challenge. Getting to carbon-free by 2030 is, and you're going to hear from experts in a few minutes, and I look forward to hearing from these experts, but it's not without challenges. It doesn't mean that we are going to stop trying or doing our very best to get there. And I can tell you that when we go to MSC after Vice Mayor was talking about our budget and getting that done, we'll be doing an update to the MSC after budget adoption and sharing exactly where we are. We're in the process of engaging multiple studies to really get us towards a path, not just this theoretical discussion, but really a path about how we're going to get to carbon-free, because it's going to take technologies that don't exist today. And we need to be open to that. We need to be open to understanding that our utility is changing. The way that we operate for so many years has been to procure energy, to make sure that we have transmission lines, whether they're underground or overhead, and make sure that we can get the electricity out to our residents and ratepayers. And that's changing, not only just with solar, microgrids, we've got wind power coming up, we've got battery energy storage systems coming up, and we have to be very mindful of embracing technology, making sure that the utility, which is a public one, is still solvent and is still reliable, but not get caught up in this idea that we can't do both, that we can't be reliable, that we can't be green, and that we don't have to make sure that we're not paying or having our ratepayers pay more than they can afford. And I think that we can do all of those things, and we're open to doing all of those things. I am really happy to say that our general manager position has closed, and we are looking for, I think, recruitment to really gear up in the next couple of months, and maybe have an announcement sometime in the fall in terms of having a person that's going to be permanent to the position that can really help implement some of the policies that we're talking about. And I've been excited to learn, humbled to be with the team that I have. General Manager Jeremy Marquette is standing in the back, handles all of our technology, all of our systems internally. Kelly Wen is our General Manager for power procurement. So she's the one that really is putting together all of these deals to help us get the wind and the clean energy that we're talking about. And so the team is talented. The team is committed to implementing the City Council's policy as set forth in Resolution 9977. And more importantly, we are willing and really committed to listening to the public and learning so that we can move forward together. And so with that, I would like to sit down myself and learn from these experts who are going to speak tonight. And I don't know if that's Justin or the Vice Mayor that's going to come back up, but I wanted to thank you for your time, and I wanted to thank the Vice Mayor for inviting me, and thank the City Managers, Mr. Marquez, for the opportunity to serve in this capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Sir, yeah, go ahead. I don't know if we have name tags. If you want to just have a seat.
Am I there?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I think so. We may need another seat up here,
I'm happy
Justin,
to
because
Vice Mayor, it's up to you.
okay,
I'll sit
all right.
wherever you
Well,
go.
then we'll have David sit in the front row.
Sir,
We know
thank
where
you.
to find you,
Yes, sir.
and thanks to your staff for coming as well. These are familiar faces to us at City Council. Can we thank David's staff for being here as well? Thank you. So those of you who've heard me speak about climate change have heard how I sort of have a mantra that, you know, if we can't do it in Pasadena, who can? Because we've got Caltech, JPL, the Carnegie Observatories. We really have the greatest minds in the world right here in Pasadena. So we kind of have to be a leader. And we've got some good examples of that here with us tonight. I guess the first person I bring up is Wes Reutimann, who is a regular at City Council. Wes, come on up. And Wes is going to moderate our discussion. Thanks for being here. Wes is part of a number of initiatives in Pasadena, everything from bicycle-friendly transportation to the Pasadena 100. Is Cynthia here as well? Cynthia Cannady? Where's Cynthia? Hi, Cynthia. Cynthia is one of the leaders of Pasadena 100 as well. Come on up. I think you're part of this too, or are you going to stay where you are? Yep. Come on up, Cynthia. Great. Thanks. And as Cynthia's coming up, we have Stephen Lowe, who's a professor at Caltech, professor of, thank you, professor of computing and mathematical sciences and in the Department of Electrical Engineering. I explained to him before the program that I'm an English major, so he needs to really dumb it down for me, certainly. And then Will McNamara is here. Will serves as grid energy storage policy analyst for Sandia National Laboratories with a focus on energy storage policy development at the federal and state level. So come on up, Will, and let's get our panel organized here. Thank you. Okay, come on up and have a seat. And then I'll let Wes have the lectern and carry our...
Yeah, Stephen go first with his keynote.
Okay, we're going to start with Stephen?
His, PowerPoint.
Okay, great. Terrific.
And Christopher Yeh, too, right, from Caltech.
And while Justin's pulling that up, just wanted to share, I'm a parent here at San Rafael. Thank you again for coming this evening. If you haven't been to campus the last 6 months, $160,000 was spent on schoolyard greening and urban forestry work in the back, which was formerly all asphalt, so over 30 native trees and dozens of native plants were put in the ground. West Pasadena Residents Association is very generous in donating this gorgeous repurposed log bench for the students, which has been utilized immediately. So if you have a chance after the event or next time you're on campus, take a peek in the back and you can see the transformation that's underway. And next couple of years, tens of millions of Measure O funds will also be spent to finally bring this campus kind of up to par, because as many of you know, it's been in limbo for over a decade and has lacked investment. So thank you. Yeah, thank you again to everyone for supporting campus. And if you want to exercise your green thumb, Saturday, May 18th from 9 to 12, there'll be a volunteer greening event for the entire community and the school community. So thanks again for joining.
Well, thank you very much, Vice Mayor and David Reyes, and also Cynthia Cannady for the kind invitation. So I'll share some of the thoughts on decarbonized energy systems. Okay. So I basically talk about two things briefly. One is climate emergency, and we try to connect the dot between the goal that Pasadena tried to achieve and the climate crisis that we read about on a monthly basis in the news. And then secondly, if we want to achieve zero carbon grid, what are the challenges and what are some of the solutions that we can implement today? So global warming, temperature rise can cause all kinds of crises, as again, we have read them nowadays almost on a monthly basis. Humanitarian crisis, when people lose their life, economic crisis, when they lose their livelihood. If they lose where they can live, we have refugee crisis, which can be a political crisis, and a national security. So what scientists believe is that temperature rise is caused, among other things, in the last couple hundred years, most importantly, by the greenhouse gases that we have been emitting. And that is driven by economy enabled by energy use. If you look at energy use, there are two activities, electricity generation and transportation, that will emit more than half of all greenhouse gases. And therefore, in order to solve the crisis, drastically reduce greenhouse gases, we have to electrify transportation, and we have to generate clean, renewable electricity. And that's what the goal Pasadena tried to achieve by 2030. So let me just show you, some of us are familiar with the story. Let me show you some facts, some data underlying this that connects what Pasadena tries to achieve with the crisis, the various crises that we've seen. So the first thing we know is a correlation between temperature rise and greenhouse gas emission. So the x-axis is time. So there are two curves that show the temperature and the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over the last 800,000 years, except for the last couple hundred years, which we'll add later on. So the red curve, you can see that goes up and down, fluctuates over the last 800 years are the temperature fluctuations. And if you look at the blue curve, which is the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the most important feature is that they fluctuate statistically in the same pattern. When temperature rises, carbon dioxide rises, and vice versa. So it's not only a very strong correlation between the two, scientists actually understand the mechanism through which emission causes temperature rise, and therefore it's a causation between the two. So temperature rise, indeed, among other things, is very much due to greenhouse gas emissions, especially for the last couple hundred years. So let's look at the temperature over the last couple hundred years. So this is the temperature, global average temperature from 1850 to today. So the important feature is that the average global temperature has increased by more than 1 degree Celsius, about 1.2, over the last couple hundred years. And there's a sharp rise in the 20th century. And therefore, we would expect over the last couple hundred years, over the same period, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would also have increased. And indeed, it did. So this is the atmospheric carbon dioxide content over the last 10,000 years. So you see that for a long time, over the last 10,000 years, the carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere stays roughly 280 or lower parts per million by volume. And then 1900 came along, it started to shoot up extremely fast. 1960, 80, 2000, and today. So this is the history over the last 10,000 years. And again, if we look back at the carbon content over the last 800,000 years, the graph that we saw before, but append the last couple hundred years, then we see that the rate at which it goes up has been extremely fast, but more importantly, it is the level that it has attained. Over the last 800,000 years, the peak, the carbon dioxide fluctuates, the peak has been under 300 parts per million, 299. That's the previous peak over the last entire 800,000 years. But now we are at 420. So these are where those emissions come from, different countries. From the bottom, you have, Europe, US, China, and so on. So this is the emission every year. And again, you see there's a sharp rise since 1900s, and China rise extremely fast since the 80s. If you look at the cumulative CO2, so from 1750, around Industrial Revolution, then the cumulative CO2, US has emitted the most, EU the second, and China is catching up very fast. So why are we emitting so much greenhouse gases? And the reason is economy. So the rise in the standard of living. If you look at, on the x-axis, is the measure of wealth, is the GDP per capita. On the y-axis is the emission per capita. Right? So if we look at the US, which is the red dot, that one, thank you very much, Chris. So we see that we are pretty wealthy, about 60,000 per capita, dollars per capita, and we are emitting quite a bit, about more than 15 metric tons of CO2. And then you can see different countries. You see China is lower in wealth and lower in emission, and so on and so forth. And therefore, there's a very strong correlation between why we are emitting so much, because of the rise of standards of living. So this is 2020. If you look at the last 2,000 years, the GDP, the global GDP, has been flat for most of the last 2,000 years until Industrial Revolution, then it shot up. So this is a huge change, and with many, many implications, and climate change is one of them. Just a comment that the x-axis of the lower graph is not time, unlike the other graphs, is essentially energy inequality. So for example, if you look at the dot for US and Mexico, two neighboring countries, per capita, US emits 15.5 tons of CO2 and Mexico 3.4. Australia, Indonesia, two neighboring countries, is 13.8 versus 2.3, and so on. Just a side note. Okay, so now we understand the reason we emit that much is because we need energy to drive the economy, to fuel the economy. If you look at energy, where this is the data for the US in 2020, so the data from 1990 to 2021, that shows that in 2021, for example, 82% of total greenhouse gas emissions is due to energy use. So the reason we emit so much is because we need energy. If you look at energy use, two activities, electricity generation and transportation, they emit more than 50% of all greenhouse gases. And they consume 65% of all primary energies. So the primary energies are the nuclear, the petroleum, the coal, the gas, the hydro, renewables, everything. All the energy that's produced, we can produce on the planet, these two activities consume 65% of them in the US and emit more than half of greenhouse gas emissions. And therefore, in order to drastically reduce greenhouse gases, we have to achieve the goal that Pasadena is trying to achieve by 2030. So, and unfortunately, in 2019, these both numbers is lower than those numbers in 2019 by only 2%. But it is accelerating, not only in the US, but also globally. So there's good hope. Just one more interesting fact. If you look at the emissions due to electricity generation, so only electricity generation, the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, then the US in 2020 emitted about 1.6 or 1.7 metric tons of greenhouse gases. If you break down by the states, these are the top 20 states. Texas is interesting. It has a very big carbon-based economy, but it also has, I think, number 2 in the US in terms of renewables. It's catching up. And the top 5 states emit about a third of all greenhouse gases from electricity generation. California is 2.6. Okay, so I think it is still quite amazing, even though the qualitative story, many of us may be familiar, it is still quite amazing to look at the underlying numbers, because the scientists told us about this crisis 50 years ago. And now we are starting to get our act together. So 50 years on, from the first oil shock, today's energy decision makers, so this is from a report by International Energy Agency, that points out that we have a lot more tools available, technologies, but also policy tools. And therefore, the crucial step is to put these readily available solutions to work, which again is what Pasadena tries to do. So what does it take to achieve zero carbon grid? Let me start with, where do we get our electricity? When we plug into the wall, we get, or turn on the light and so on. So the electricity comes from, we generate from the power plants. So these traditionally are the coal power plants, gas power plants, nuclear, hydros, and so on. So those are the big power plants, and there are less than 20,000 these bulk power generation plants that generate more than 90% of electricity in the States. Importantly, these are where we control the network. So the stability of the network depends on how we control this very small number of generation plants in the entire US network. The loads, there are 130 million customers, so these are utility customers, so there are tons and tons of loads. We don't really control that much. So that's one feature. So we generate those electricity from the power plants, goes through this network, and eventually to the houses and commercial buildings and factories and so on. Both features will be turned on its head. That is, if we replace those fossil generation plants by solar farms, wind farms, and other renewable sources, we will lose our ability to control. And therefore, there's an issue of how do we maintain supply-demand balance? How do we maintain stability of the network? And other issues as well. So we'll see how we can do that. So how do we decarbonize? 3 things. It really boils down to 3 things, technically. One is we need a lot of renewables. Wind and solar are the most, but there are also geothermal, biomass, and so on. But wind and solar is going to dominate. And in California, solar will by far be. So today, for example, if you look at the California electricity system, 73% during the day, not during the night, but 73% of the renewables are from solar. So there will be a lot of solar and wind farms. Those are utility scale, non-local generations, but there are also distributed generations, rooftops of households, commercial buildings, or some community parks and so on. So we need a lot of that. Secondly, we will deploy a lot of storage. Again, these can be storage that are battery farms, that are storage devices operated by utility or by the community or even by households. So we'll see some of that. And number 3, we will have a lot of what's called distributed energy resources. So those are PVs, photovoltaic, solar panels, storage, battery storage, EVs, smart inverters, and so on. So these are new kinds of energy resources on the grid. They both can pose challenges to the grid, but also they present tremendous opportunities because these loads are extremely flexible, they are intelligent, and therefore, instead of controlling the generators, like what we have been doing for the last 100 years, we can control these intelligent, large, and flexible loads. EV are extremely large loads compared with average household, for example. And therefore, they can be part of the problem. They can strain by adding a lot of load on the grid. But they are also extremely valuable resources to help us integrate renewables because these are large but flexible loads. One of the issues we are already starting to see today in CalISO, the California electricity system and markets, is that during the day, there's too much solar that's generated. We have to curtail them. We basically have to throw them away. April last year, the renewable curtailment in CalISO was worth $83 million. So we basically throw away, right? If we do, for example, workplace EV charging, not only we can solve the problem by having suddenly a large increase in load from EV, we can also use that to even out the demands and supplies, as you will see some of them. So those are the big issues. So the point is that going forward, we will have a lot of new kinds of distributed energy resources. It would require us to figure out a way to operate them efficiently in order to achieve 100% clean electricity. So let me just briefly comment on each one of them. So the first, renewable generation. What does the sea trend look like globally? The path is bright, basically. So the bottom line is PV and wind is already, by 2019, the lowest cost generation resources. They're cheaper than gas and everything else. And therefore, the economics has flipped, that the renewables will drive themselves. And indeed, we see that in the market. So, for example, if you look at the cost of solar, between 2009 and 2019, over that 10 years, the solar has declined by 89%, from $359 per megawatt hour to $40. Same story with wind. And therefore, renewables will happen at scale. And indeed, it does. So this is the global PV outlook. So in 2015, 50 gigawatts of PV has been added in that year. 2022, 220 gigawatts of solar capacity has been added globally. The manufacturing capacity is 120 gigawatt and 640. So we have a lot more manufacturing capacity. Looking forward to 2030, the estimate is we will add 800 gigawatt of new PV capacity in that year, in that single 2030, if the countries implement the policies that they have today. Basically, if they do what they say they will do, we will add 500 gigawatt. Now, compare with if we want to achieve net zero emission by 2050, which will allow us to maintain the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees at the end of the century, so that NZE path will require, instead of adding 500, we will add 825 gigawatt in that year. So can we do that? Absolutely. So the manufacturing capacity by 2030 is estimated to be 1,200 gigawatt. So we have way more ability to deploy solar than we need. It really boils down to the commitment to do it. So that's the solar picture globally, but here's closer to home. The last 2 months, so from March 8th to May 5th. Just look at the green curve. What it shows is that over the last 2 months, the fraction of the grid demand that was met by renewables, 3 renewables, wind, water, solar. So if you look at the green curve over the last 2 months, on average, every day, we are meeting demand from renewable sources 63%. That's higher than I thought. That's higher than I expected. Great news. Even the minimum is like 46%. So things are indeed happening. So the renewables are happening. What are the implications? Because the renewable generations are volatile, it causes 3 key technical challenges that need to be addressed. One is instability, as I mentioned earlier. For the last 100 years, the way we maintain stability in the grid is by controlling those fossil or big bulk generators, which are mostly fossil. If we are going to replace that by wind and solar farms, we cannot control them. we have to control the loads. And as I mentioned earlier, indeed, there are new, large, and flexible smart loads coming on. And we have to do that. We have to figure out a way to do it. The second thing is unpredictability. It's really difficult to forecast not only the loads, but now also the generations. Whereas in the past, we can determine exactly how much to generate when and where. Then we will lose that. Right? So the ability to reliably forecast generations load will be critical in how we can operate our grid. And the third is unavailability. We could have rare, hopefully, but it is possible to have extended periods where we don't have enough wind or solar. But there are solutions to this. One is we are seeing already that the batteries and EVs will be deployed at scale. They are happening at scale, and they will grow more. Secondly is we can indeed figure out ways to control those distributed energy resources in order to maintain stability. And there are also technologies, AI-based technologies, that will allow us to forecast much more accurately the generation of the loads, and Chris Yeh will talk about that. And long-duration battery technologies or storage technologies that we will talk about that. And the most important, probably the most difficult piece, is the commitment to put these solutions to work. And Cynthia will talk about that. So let me just quickly close by just comment on the first two pieces very briefly. Okay, and we're doing good, well on time. So the first piece, the battery. So what is the situation there? The battery. If you look at the battery, basically the battery costs have been dropping dramatically, just like the solar. Overnight, the period 1990 to today, battery costs has dropped by 99%. In summer last year, for the first time, the cost has dropped below $100 per kilowatt hour. And it will continue to drop. If you look at the cost decline, not over time, but over the size of battery market deployments, again, you see exponential drops. So the y-axis is what's called the log scale, but basically it's an exponential drop, which simply means that it drops extremely fast. Moreover, if you look at the rate in the last about 20 years, 2003 to 2023, that rate at which it drops, that rate itself has increased. So it drops faster, even on this exponential scale. And again, you will continue to drop, that's the forecast. And because as the market expands, as the technology advances, the cost will continue to drop. So think about today, it may be $100 per kilowatt hour, maybe by 2030 is half of that. The implication on the cost of EV, the implication on the cost of stationary battery deployment for a zero carbon grid, there's very strong implications. CalISO today, so this is April, we have about 10,000 gigawatt of battery already. The estimate to achieve 100% clean electricity by 2045, the estimate is that we will require 52 gigawatt battery. We are already 20% towards that goal. So by all expectation, we will exceed that goal. Between 2018 and April 2024, the battery capacity on CalISO has increased by more than 20 times. It must be extremely profitable. Last comment, grid optimization. Now we have all kinds of distributed energy resources, batteries, EVs, PVs, in the future, heat pumps and smart inverters and so on. How do we orchestrate the most efficient way to control them, to optimize the operations, to maintain grid stabilities and so on? So I will just make two comments. So again, we will have lots and lots of distributed energy resources. They are also extremely valuable demand response resources. As I mentioned earlier, these new resources were not available in the past. They are large capacity, they are flexible, they are smart. They will allow us to do demand response much more actively, much more dynamically, much more efficiently than we were able to do for the last many decades. So the potential is huge. How do we do that? So let me just make 2 comments on how this can be done. And indeed, people are starting to do it. So the first comment is the potential of demand response. And let me use the August 2020 California rolling outage. Some of you might still remember we had mid-August, August 14, August 15, we had rolling outages, blackouts, for those numbers. Let me use the August 14 blackout as a reference to say, what is the potential demand response? What is the potential of EV as a grid resource? So the potential for grid response, one indication of that is huge, basically. That's the bottom line. It's large. One indication of that is that during the August blackout, after August 14 and 15, the governor, the mayors, and everyone basically asked everyone to reduce their demand. And indeed, Californians reduced demand by 4 gigawatt. And that avoided subsequent outages. In comparison, during that August 14 blackout, we only need to share 1 gigawatt for 2 hours. And therefore, there's tremendous, okay, 1 more minute. All right. Okay, EV, the potential EV. The bottom line is that if we have about 100 EVs that help, they use 20% of their battery capacity to help with that emergency, we could have avoided the August 2020 blackout. So tremendous. Okay, last, I will close. As people say, you cannot manage or optimize what you do not measure. And the first thing I think we should do is to, indeed, it is possible now to equip distribution transformers with intelligence. With that, you can do a lot. So this is, let me just comment, this is the deployment we did with a Riverside utility. You can do it, you can do the measurement at the low voltage side of the distribution transformer. It gives it a lot of data, a lot of intelligence on your network that can allow you to do many things. I think this is my last slide. Oh, this is just one example of what you can do, but I will close. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lowe. Yeah, this is incredibly informational and educational. We want to make sure folks have time to ask questions. I'm sure there will be many. So we're going to transition to our panel, and we're going to ask that our panelists try to keep it to 10 minutes for the first round, and then we're going to kick it off to Will of Sandia Labs to start us off. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. It is a real pleasure to be here with you. I want to give my thanks to the City of Pasadena and to the Vice Mayor for this opportunity to be here. I want to thank Cynthia for her coordination. I am Will McNamara with Sandia National Labs, and Sandia is part of the Department of Energy. We are a federally funded national laboratory with a focus on research and development. We have 13,000 employees, so we're involved in quite a lot of activities. But what I'm going to be talking about in about 10 minutes is the role of energy storage in the concept of decarbonization. I'll give you an introduction into the role that Sandia is playing with public power and municipal utilities and other entities across the country. And then I'm going to speak to some of the federal opportunities that are really driving the clean energy sector forward. So first of all, what is decarbonization? I think it's important to kind of start out at the high level and then we can drill down. Decarbonization is a process. It's a shift away from what has been the traditional reliance on fossil fuels, meaning coal and natural gas. And we're moving toward renewable energy, solar and wind. Clean energy, which includes nuclear power, can also be included in that definition. Now, Pasadena's mandate to achieve 100% carbon-free electricity by 2030 is certainly an example of decarbonization. It's very consistent with national trends. There are 19 states that have adopted decarbonization goals. There are 15 cities alone in California including Pasadena, that have adopted decarbonization goals. And when we look nationally, there are 80 cities. So you're in very good company with this national effort. The slides that I'm going to go through pretty quickly, I believe, will be made available to you that you can look at your leisure. But so what Sandia is doing to help these communities is that we support state energy offices, public utility commissions, and also public power utilities. We help them in several different ways. One is to examine where funding opportunities might exist through the federal government, and we're at a terrific point in our history that there is more funding available now than ever before, and that really helps absorb the costs that flow down to customers. Secondly, we work in demonstration projects, and so as we're discussing, there's a number of new technologies that are emerging. We can help a public utility figure out what is the best technology mix to serve the unique needs of their utility, their customers, and their goals that they want to achieve. We also have modeling tools, so we can figure out the economics, we can figure out where these technologies are best placed, and best of all, we do this free of charge. Because we're funded through the Department of Energy, this is a service that we offer. We're independent, we're objective, we are technology agnostic, so we're not coming in with any advocacy pushing any particular solution. Here's a bit more information about our demonstration projects, which again you can take a look at your leisure. One initiative that I'm particularly excited about is we just launched in January a 3-year initiative that's focused on long-duration energy storage. And I'm going to talk to you about why we are going to need ever-increasing amounts of LDES technologies as we go forward. But this is a 3-year initiative. We received $7.5 million in funding from the DOE. It's a lab-led initiative. Sandia is the lead lab, and I happen to be the principal investigator, so I'm leading this effort. We have 5 other national lab partners, but the success of this initiative is really dependent on the participation of external entities. These are entities outside of the lab system. So we're talking about technology developers, suppliers, utilities, investors, academic researchers, community groups, and customer representatives. All are welcome to join us in this effort. The focus of the effort is to look at what are the challenges facing LDES technologies, and in a very consensus-based way work on recommendations that can move the technologies toward commercialization within the next decade. At present, we have about 160 teaming partners. Many are coming from California, so encourage organizations to join us in this effort. We have a website where you can find more information, ldesconsortium.sandia.gov. So I want to talk about the role of energy storage. This is an incredibly exciting time for the energy industry. It's really unprecedented. We're in a time of mammoth transformation, and it all comes down to decarbonization. So to put it very simply, the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. So how are we going to make those resources dispatchable and support the fact that we're going to be relying on them ever more heavily as we go forward? The answer is in energy storage. Energy storage is a critical component of decarbonization. It helps to smooth out the fluctuations of the electrical grid, which can be caused by the intermittency of these resources. It's a technology that provides a lot of flexibility to use power when it's needed, use it based on prices and fluctuations in load patterns. So low power short-term storage is currently cost-effective using batteries that have a less than a 4-hour duration. Those are typically lithium-ion batteries, and they are absolutely serving a very important purpose right now. But as we continue to have the build-out of renewables, we're going to need ever longer durations of energy storage, and that's what is driving this need to look at new technologies. Particularly as we get to those concentrations of 60% renewables, that's where the need for LDES is just exponentially greater, and in decarbonization, that's what we are headed toward. So the role and the need for new technologies, again, lithium-ion batteries are great, and they do serve a very important purpose, but they have an average of 4 hours duration. That's not going to get us where we need to be for durations greater than 10 hours, interday storage, and seasonal energy storage. Furthermore, relying solely on lithium-ion batteries has a lot of risks associated with it. The supply is going to far exceed the demand because it's going to be increasingly used for electrical vehicles. There are fire concerns that have been raised, and there's just not going to be enough of it to support the grid scale revolution that we're talking about. So we are increasingly now looking at these emerging technologies that include thermal, gravity, chemical storage. There are dozens of chemistries and hundreds of developers that are emerging. That's the good news because there are many options now that are being presented to utilities such as Pasadena Water Power. It's a double-edged sword, though, because with so many technologies to choose from, it sometimes makes the decision-making process a bit challenging. Again, that is something that Sandia can really help with. Some of these technologies are in pilot phase, some are commercially available, and I think we're ultimately going to be needing a diversity of technologies. I don't think that there's one solution that's going to meet the needs for every situation. So we need a diversity of technologies to be tested as we scale up and have more of these technologies used. That will help the costs come down as well. And so the lab experiments that are being conducted, the commercial deployments in pilot phase, all of those are contributing to lowering prices. Now, the LDES market is quite nascent. It's emerging. Historically, pumped hydro storage has accounted for about 90% of the long-duration energy storage market. But pumped hydro is not realistic everywhere. There are many geographical considerations. So again, that underscores the need for these new technologies. Right now, we're in a phase of demonstrations and solution development with the influx of federal funding that's come in. These technologies are being tested, and the end users are being are supporting this effort. So whether it's a utility that has a pilot project or a large corporation, we're in the process of testing these technologies and seeing which ones are really going to thrive going forward. There's literally billions of dollars being invested into this space. And now is really the time for a utility to define what applications they want to serve with long-duration energy storage and factor in how it's going to support a long-term roadmap to decarbonization. So I want to tell you a little bit about what's happening in terms of federal funding. You may have heard about the Inflation Reduction Act. It is a major piece of federal stimulus money that has been approved by the Biden administration. It is the largest piece of federal funding that is going toward clean energy that we've ever seen. This is going to bring unprecedented levels of new capital into wind, solar, battery storage, clean hydrogen, and carbon carbon capture projects. It offers an investment tax credit to projects, 30%. For the first time, standalone energy storage projects can now seek that ITC. And with the addition of bonus credits, depending on where the project is built, if it's in a disadvantaged community, you can add up those bonuses and get up to a 50% coverage of the total costs. There are particular opportunities that are now being available to public power entities, including Pasadena Water and Power. This is really key because prior to the IRA, those opportunities were not available. Now, this is a huge piece of legislation, but there's one piece that I'd really like to underscore for you. It's called direct pay, and it is specifically relevant to public power utilities. Now, before the IRA, public utilities that are exempt from income tax were largely ineligible to receive clean energy credits because they do not have any tax liability. So the competitive advantage when compared to, let's say, investor-owned utilities was a real disparity. Now, with this change, the eligibility restrictions have been lifted, and municipal utilities, public power utilities, are eligible for these tax credits. They can now receive a refund from the IRS in terms of tax credits on projects that are put into place anytime after 2022. So this is happening right now. There is abundant federal funding that is available. So clearly that opens up many new channels for investment in clean power projects. An example is what's happening fairly close to home here with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. They are an entity that has also very aggressive clean energy goals. A few that I wanted to throw out to you are they're conducting trials, the pilot programs of LDES at a facility. They are looking at safety and reliability issues, testing these technologies to make sure that they are reliable. They are doing investigations into electric transportation, and all of this is contributing to their own goal of achieving 100% clean energy. So again, you're in very good company with some of the other cities here in California, all working toward this end goal. I know that was quick. Went through a lot of information rather quickly, but I do have backup slides that are offered in this deck, which I believe is going to be distributed to all of you. But I think the message that I really want to drive home is we are, and I loved what the Vice Mayor said about looking at this at the macro level. This is a convergence of stakeholders across the industry, utilities, technology developers, policymakers, and end-use customers. To achieve decarbonization and make it work for all of us, we all have to be taking ownership of this, and it's really going to rely on the contributions of everyone at that macro level. So I applaud what the City of Pasadena is doing. And I would encourage you to consider the federal support that's available both through Sandia and the Department of Energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. So next up, we're going to hear from Chris Yeh of Caltech. We are running short on time, so we're going to ask our final panelists to try to move us through to make sure everyone gets to ask a question or two. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vice Mayor, and also Cynthia for coordinating, and everyone else for being here tonight. It is really my honor and pleasure to be here and talk about the role of technology, and specifically AI, for helping us get to cheaper and lower emissions electricity. And I'll try to make this as relevant as possible to Pasadena, this community here. So I'm a PhD student at Caltech. I actually work on my research is more on the AI side, but a lot of my applications are focused on energy systems. So so kind of just a little bit of background of my work is on algorithms for predicting electricity demand. I also do AI simulators and algorithms for carbon-aware load control. If these terms don't mean anything to you, hopefully they will by the end of this presentation. So I want to start by pointing out, this is today. This is yesterday, May 7th. And you can see in green, so this is 24 hours of the day, and in green was the total electricity demand for at every hour of the day. In purple is the net demand, basically if we subtract out the wind and the solar and hydro. And so that's the net demand in purple. And you can see if just at the net demand actually at noon, California was generating more electricity from renewables than we were consuming electricity as a state. So we were over 100% renewables at noon yesterday. So that's huge. And so this is what Professor Lowe was mentioning earlier. So much of our renewable energy is wasted. That is $83 million of wasted money kind of per year kind of situation. That's a lot of money that we're just throwing away. And that's really where the battery storage stuff comes in. So everything that Will just talked about, batteries and storage will help us capture that wasted energy, the energy that is currently being wasted so that we can still use it. But I drew on 2 red arrows, and those 2 red arrows, what those are indicating is how kind of bad of a job we are at forecasting how much net energy demand there is. So the dotted line on the bottom was what our forecast for the net energy demand, which is going to be. The forecast was made a day before this plot, so it was made on May 6th. And you can see there's a pretty big gap. And so really right now, our net demand forecasts are not that great. And the reason why that's a problem is because if we had better forecasts, we can actually reduce electricity prices. And so this is hopefully a little bit of background that I want to get through, but electricity is bought and sold mostly on day-ahead markets. So the electricity that's being used right now, people decided that generation level and bought and sold that yesterday. So the majority of electricity is sold then, but there's going to be some errors in that forecast. We see here, there's big errors in these forecasts. So what happens when there's there's this error? So there's a real-time market also, where this gap is made up. So the gap between day-ahead forecasted demand and real-time demand is purchased in the real-time market, and prices are much higher in the real-time market. So this is not the California. I tried to find a plot for California. I actually couldn't find one really quickly, so I pulled one from a different part of the US. But you can see in blue are the day-ahead prices. And so they're pretty constant, pretty flat. But you look at the real-time prices, and they fluctuate. They go really high up sometimes. And so if we had a bad forecast for, say, like hour 14, so like 2 p.m. on March 10th, and then you would have had, the utility companies would have had to pay, double their normal price for electricity to buy that energy from the spot market. So better forecasts can help us stay on that blue curve instead of having to deal with these green curve prices. Right? So this is one place where better predictive technologies, so AI in particular, is probably the most advanced type of prediction algorithms that we have. Those can help us reduce electricity prices. So those will reduce electricity prices for the utilities, which then in turn can reduce prices for the rest of us. And just to show that for another part of the country, so this is Texas. This is Texas in October of 2021, across 4 different days. And again, the dark blue line, that's the day-ahead price. And the red line that goes up, that peaks, that's the real-time prices. So again, you can see this is like why you can see real-time prices are really high sometimes, and this is why better predictive technologies can really help reduce prices. Okay, and not only can we reduce prices, we can, if we have enough energy storage, like batteries or pumped hydro, we can take advantage of negative electricity prices during the daytime. And so who here didn't know that we had negative electricity prices? I just want to make this a little more interactive. Okay, yeah. So turns out we have negative electricity prices. That's negative $39 per megawatt hour today at 2 p.m. when I took this screenshot from the California website. And so you can see California is in dark blue, so that's very negative. We are paying, during the day, prices in California are negative. Our neighbors up in Seattle, Washington are unfortunate. They have to pay positive prices. We get negative prices. That means we're getting, we're generating so much solar. This is because we were generating so much solar today that we were otherwise have been wasted. And so these solar power plants are literally asking people, please, use more electricity. Battery systems, please, store our energy. How can a solar power plant operate with negative prices? Well, so they're getting also some subsidies from the government, which allows them to pass on those subsidies to us in terms of forms of negative prices. Okay, so I really want to point out just how special California is. We have negative electricity prices, and these are quite negative electricity prices during the day. And so this is, if we zoom in on California, we zoom into Pasadena. So in Pasadena, during today, we were actually seeing negative $45 per megawatt hour, which is really, that's if we could somehow pass those on to consumers, that would be fantastic. Okay, and so one thing we can do is we can predict. So these prices actually fluctuate a lot. Like I showed earlier, these prices fluctuate. And so one thing that we can do is also predict these prices. If we can predict when those negative prices are, that's when we should be charging the batteries. That's when we should be charging our EVs. Imagine if you had an EV and you could get paid to charge your electric vehicle. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay, so not only can we predict prices, we can also predict carbon emissions. So carbon emissions, so different types of generators have different types of emissions. So coal and natural gas have higher emissions. Wind and solar, basically zero emissions. And so we can predict basically how much emissions is there going to be in the grid at a given time. And so we can also optimize for electricity, using electricity when the electricity is generated by renewables and generated by lower emissions. And you can see actually California, they do a bit of clever accounting here. Because during the day we were generating so much, more than 100% of our need with solar and wind, we were exporting that to our neighboring states like Nevada and Oregon. And so we counted that actually as negative emissions. You can see in the evenings, emissions are high. That's because there's no solar and wind. During the daytime, we have negative emissions. And so imagine if you had a smart, intelligent electric vehicle charger that could figure out, well, maybe I'll wait a little bit until prices are lower and prices are negative. I'll wait a little bit until those emissions are zero, and then I'll charge, because maybe I only need 2 hours to charge, but this car is going to be parked for 8 hours. Why don't I pick the best 2 hours out of those 8 hours to charge my car? And that's what a smart EV charger will do. Currently, EV chargers are kind of dumb. Most of them, you plug in your car, they start charging right away, even if you're going to be parked there for 8 hours. It should be smart and just choose those best 2 hours to give you the lowest price and the lowest carbon footprint. And so this applies not just to EV chargers. There's a bunch of these controllable loads, whether that's data centers, EV chargers, thermostats, batteries. So this is an example of something that Google's already doing. So Google's data centers, consume a huge amount of electricity, and they do this thing where now they will align their compute load with low carbon energy. So they're actually already putting this into practice. This is not something that's hypothetical. It's something that is actively being done right now as we speak. They actually not only do, this is called time shifting, so shifting their AI, usually mostly AI compute, all their computations to times a day when the electricity is cheap and emissions are low. They actually are doing one step further, and they actually do geographic load shifting as well. This is not something that Pasadena can do, but kind of just thinking bigger, we can try to move things that require energy to places that have lower carbon or lower cost electricity. So just to kind of summarize everything I've talked about, so these are the 4 things that we can use better predictive AI algorithms to do. Predict better electricity generation, predict better electricity demand, predict electricity prices, and predict carbon emissions. And we can predict all those things more accurately than we can today. And I forgot to mention, right now, the way that the California ISO is predicting these electricity generation demand is with almost kind of, it's like pencil and paper versus calculators. It's very old school stuff, which is why we see these huge gaps. They are slowly trying to get to the new AI technologies. And so if we can get to predicting all these things accurately, we can really pass on savings, maybe even some of those negative costs, to consumers. And wouldn't that be great? So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And now we'll turn it to Cynthia Cannady of Pasadena 100.
Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. This audience, you guys have been listening to all of this dense technical information, and I'm looking at your faces, and you're paying attention. It's so amazing. Good to see that. I'm going to talk real fast, or I'm going to jump over some slides, I think, because I need to. There we go. Just personally, I want to say something about myself and how I came to this subject. In college at Stanford, I was a history major, and I was math averse, and I think my science requirement was fulfilled with molecular biology for poets. So I got into this kind of indirectly, but amazingly, for the last 40 years, or more actually, I've been a lawyer for technology companies and to some extent consulting with countries on technology strategy and development. Then I moved to Pasadena, and I got involved with the League of Women Voters, and I want to call out Kathy Berlin over there and some other League members here. We started talking about energy democracy and what we could do here in Pasadena at the local level. We concluded that we have a right to understand electric power. We have a duty to understand it because it's so important today, as you've heard from the other speakers. Just a reflection. I think it's very pertinent after listening to these experts. One of the things that I've observed in all of my years working with these brilliant people, these scientists and engineers, is that technology advances very quickly. Whether you're talking about semiconductors, which went from these gigantic semiconductors to little tiny chips, or if you're talking about AI or the biotech industry, which started very small, some inventions at Stanford and Berkeley, or the internet, how fast all of that happened. It can happen fast, and I tell you, anyone who says you can't do something, that technology is impossible, they're going to be embarrassed, because what we're going to see is that's not true. It changes. We can do things with will. So Pasadena 100, I got involved with Rob Haw, who's sitting over there on the aisle, is the original founder of this organization. Started back in 2017, I think. And Pasadena 100 is a coalition of different organizations, the NAACP, Citizens Climate Lobby, the Pasadena Jewish Temple, just various different organizations that are committed to one goal, and that is advocacy for Pasadena's transition to 100% carbon-free electric power by 2030. I was on the Stakeholder Technical Advisory Group with Kelly Wen from Pasadena Water and Power last year. Sam Burnt, who's back there in the last row, is my co-chair in Pasadena 100, by the way. Sam and I and Carl Selkin here and Tara Landers were on the STAG. We learned so much from that experience. It was really amazing to learn about the challenges and opportunities. Here's a picture of Pasadena 100 organizing in front of City Hall. We talked about this a little bit more, but I want to emphasize, why did we pick electric power? Why not talk about something else? Why not talk about conservation or electric vehicles or something? It's because of that purple slice there. 25%. And Professor Lowe talked about this. 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing climate change come from electric power. So these lights right here. And about 2 years ago in Pasadena, Kelly can correct me, but I know it was in recent history, we were getting about 48% of our electricity from burning coal. Can you believe that? That's amazing. It's changing. I just want to use this slide as kind of a summary. As a non-technical person who works with technology people, I have to simplify. So I tend to think of things in kind of basic ways. So in the STAG, Sam, who is technical and brilliant and is a systems software engineer, would kind of help me, but I had to simplify it to 5 pillars. And you've heard about them tonight. We could go on and on. There is so much interesting stuff here, but simplifying, it's importation of electricity, and that's done with contracts that are called power purchase agreements. And by the way, PWP is tearing this up. They are really doing a great job of changing the power purchase agreements. So that's a great thing. That's an important pillar. The second one is rooftop solar, expansion of rooftop solar. It's really encouraging. Glendale, actually our neighbor, is working with a consulting firm right now to try to get their rooftop solar up to 100 megawatts, which would be a major change for them. That means a whole lot of rooftop solar. And this is good for many reasons. It supplies electricity. I think my husband and I in our house, our roof is full of solar panels. We are customer generators. We actually send back electricity to our distribution grid here. And it's also good for demand reduction. So we're not taking anything we're not taking electricity. And it's good for resilience. That could be a whole other subject of a conversation. Demand reduction, you're looking here at Professor Lowe, is one of the really world-class experts at Caltech on this subject. And for me, in my lay mind, I call this working smart. You know, you're basically just trying to use less electricity using software and algorithms and math, doing it smart. And you heard Chris talk about AI and its application for that. Storage, you've heard about that tonight. We have to have storage. And I just heard from Kelly, apparently Pasadena Water and Power just got an award for a 25 megawatt storage facility. So that is very exciting news. And then physical infrastructure. We have in Pasadena the Glenarm plant, which is 14 acres of prime city land that is filled with old technology, gas burning plants. That's got to change. It's not going to be easy, but that's a challenge, and that's one of the pillars of what we're doing. I'm going to skip over that and just give you a quote, 2 quotes to end actually. One is Mark Jacobson. He wrote a great book, by the way. If any of you want to kind of go deeper into this, there's a book that's really great for lay people. I could understand it. It's called No Miracles Needed. It was published last year by Mark Jacobson, professor at Stanford. This is one of his quotes. You could power America with renewables from a technical and economic standpoint. The biggest obstacles are social and political. What you need is the will to do it. And I want to tell you, I am so proud to live in a city that has the will to do it. I want to thank the Vice Mayor, who really helped drive home the Pasadena Climate Emergency Resolution. It's very exciting. And this is just the last slide. I love this quote. It's by a Persian poet. All things are difficult before they are easy. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Cynthia, and all of our panelists. And I just want to say, really, the thanks is due from us to you all. I mean, Cynthia and Sam, and I don't want to omit anybody, but all of the the leaders of Pasadena 100. If anyone thinks that one person or one group of persons can't make a difference, well, I want to cite Pasadena 100 to you, because they were relentless in getting the attention of the city to really focus on this issue. And we did it. You know, we declared the mandate, and there was opposition, believe me, at every turn. You know, people would say, there are a lot of sort of tricks of the trade in politics. You know, people will say, yep, I'm with you. We'll be carbon neutral by 2030. Carbon neutral is not the same as carbon free. Cynthia was gracious to not mention she was replaced on the STAG by a council member who just didn't like that she was so forceful and correct in her positions, you know, and that may be a bit of an overstatement by me, but thank you. So we're grateful to all of you, and I think, you know, this is a place where some of the perspective that I have for being on the council for so long is helpful, if I may. You know, when I came on the city council, the city had just adopted a charter amendment. It was called Charter Amendment F, and I'm sure some of you remember it. It authorized but did not mandate the city to privatize our water and power, where we would not have a Pasadena Water and Power. We would essentially lay it off to Southern California Edison or Sempra or somebody like that. And I was firmly against it because I wanted to keep control here in Pasadena. I wanted to know that if you have a problem, we're calling city employees who can respond and that we can be held accountable for it. And I'm sure there was just some luck behind that too. At that time, we had signed these long-term power contracts, and by Mr. Yeh and by the professor, all of you, the presentation is so helpful because these prices are so volatile and hard to predict. But we had these long-term contracts, and they were referred to as a stranded investment because we were upside down in a very structural way, and we were committed to pay more for electricity than we should have. And then the electricity crisis occurred, and all of a sudden those were the best deals ever, because compared to the market, they weren't a stranded investment. They were now very, very, very favorable. But one thing I took as an English major, and thank you, Cynthia, for my history major there, you know, we can talk, you know, offline, and is that a fundamental issue here is energy, electricity can't easily be stored in the quantities that we need. And that's what gives rise to, you know, the reverse pricing phenomenon and the peak and non-peak, the importance of those dynamics. So we are pretty good as a country when we put our mind to something, right? I could cite many examples from, you know, World War II to even COVID and other challenges. When we really put our mind to something, we're really good about it. And I agree with, I think, all of our speakers that we will conquer this and come out the better and be a world leader for all of us. So I'm grateful, and I'm sorry we've gone over a tad. There will not be an exam. Good news, thankfully for me mostly. But I want to see if we have any questions of the panelists, of me, what's going on in the city, and obviously we can also communicate afterwards if you'd like. So we'll hand the mic around. Here, give me the cards, Justin, and then we'll do that. We'll do our raffle shortly after this. But Justin will bring you the microphone, and maybe Juan Pablo can start in the first row there. Try it without the mic, Juan Pablo. You got a deep voice. Yeah, sure. Yeah, David, you probably have some info about it. You know, I know that we are receiving benefit from it, but I don't have detail. Juan Pablo, I can get back to you, or David, we can do that.
We did receive a statement of over $9 million, and we're in the process of, thank you. We're in the process of, we've applied, and we hope that we're going to be a strong candidate for monies out of that IRA. So we're excited about that, and that's going to be for battery energy storage.
And also water.
And also water. Thank you. The Sunset Reservoir.
Okay, and the gentleman in the second row.
As much solar panel as they can afford and want. The last couple of decades when I applied for the solar system, they asked me for a bill for a whole year, and they say you may only put as much as your average daily consumption, which, I mean, I put a small 4 kilowatt system. I wanted to put probably 40. I am blessed, I have a large land, and I think many people who are large land are willing to put a bigger system, but it's a question of policy, as the lady said. So we are not going to compete with Pasadena Power Plant. Many of the cities are not going to put. So the one who want to put larger system, the cities should encourage them. They are going to pay for the citizen instead of to limit them. So I don't know what you say about that.
I think the question's about solar power and using your own system. Is that, am I interpreting that? Right, and that's a complicated question. We just put solar on our home, finally. We had issues about trees and all the rest, but I would suggest David and Kelly can answer your question more specifically about that. I think the question's about what can be put back into the grid, and as you heard really from some of our speakers, that's a complicated calculation.
I don't have a good idea of sort of the scale, either on the photovoltaic side, production, or on the battery side. So let's say the school district wanted to put solar panels on the entire roof of the school. They get a 50% credit from the feds. How much does that generate? How many of those sorts of installations would we need to cover the city of Pasadena's daily demand?
I had these, so Pasadena's average load is somewhere on the order of about 100 megawatts. Caltech alone has 2 megawatts of rooftop solar. If we covered entire Pasadena with rooftop solar everywhere we could, we would be more than enough to supply Pasadena.
Schools, PCC, and city buildings. The schools have Measure O bond money, PCC has bond money, the city has bond. They would save on their operational cost, put power back into the grid, and perhaps get Pasadena to the point where we don't need to import nearly as much power, or any power, when it's sunny during the day.
Yeah, I don't have exact numbers for that, but those are school. I mean, yeah, it really depends on like how much roof space is available. But yeah, there is a lot of potential for covering a lot of our energy needs from rooftop solar.
And on the other side, for battery storage, how big a set of batteries do you need? Do you cover the entire Glenarm plant? We've got a lot of real estate there.
John, I was just going to say, this is the kind of metric that we, the city, is doing with the consulting firm E3 and started doing somewhat in the integrated resource plan. But yes, the whole precise measurement of capacity, solar capacity, compared to load, and then batteries. So you're absolutely right, that needs to be done.
Thank you, John.
Okay. Just going to echo what the gentleman over here said. We had the same problem 10 years ago. We were only allowed to put on as many solar panels as we'd used, and we had been very, very cautious about using electricity, very environmental, lifelong Sierra Club members. So, of course, the minute we had panels, we were using more electricity, and I'm an early EV adopter, so it's ridiculous. I'm only getting about half of my energy source from that. What I want to ask the city folks, city representatives, is why does it take 4 months to get permits for me to add more solar panels and a battery? Why 4 months?
Why
they told me it's going to be 8 months. It's going to be January when I get my new system up to add another 5 megawatts, kilowatt system. Why does it take 4 months to just step on my roof and show me what you already know, my solar panels that are there? I think that's what everyday citizens just don't get motivated to do this. We're making it difficult for people. Not having our EV chargers working and up and working too. What about the low-hanging fruit, things like that? What are we doing about that as a city?
Well, I'll take that comment back. I think, you've got multiple departments involved because there are safety issues in terms of electricity transmission. So you're not talking just about water and power, but also planning and permitting, the department that David used to cover. I'm sure fire comes in at some point as well. And, in terms of this question of the grid, I mean, the city has to be able to provide reliable generation for the entire city, no matter what. And I think that's what I meant by the complicated nature of it. But these are fair points, and we should have that policy discussion in the council. Yes. Everyone hear the question about whether it sounds like individual consumers can plug into these solar farms that exist? And
yep. I would say that it leads into federal issues because of transmission capacity, so that you may have a great generating facility, but not the transmission lines to get it where you want it to go. So that is a whole other topic which federal regulators are examining how to address.
Thank you. Oh, Eddie, I'm sorry, go ahead. This is a member of the media, by the way, so be very careful.
I got to get in the line somewhere. Real quickly, we had negative pricing today of, I think you said below 40%, something like that, something extraordinary. Clearly, this is not the first time this has happened. It's probably been going on for a long time. Has anybody here, any consumer in the city benefited from that? Is there such a thing as getting a negative bill?
Certainly hope not. But I guess the question really is, what happens? How does that get absorbed into the overall mix of
Right. So that really depends. David would be a much better person to ask this question to. But in general, how these things work is that utilities have power purchasing agreements that cover most of their energy needs. So those are kind of like upfront contracts that they've already signed for electricity, and then there are differences that if there's any need for additional power, they buy it on the spot market. So that's where the negative prices would factor in. But David would be the one to really provide any more details. I don't know how that works in Pasadena specifically.
We don't give negative bills. We have to keep the utility running, but.
And I know there's a lot of research funding chasing those solutions. Yes, and then we'll go to the other side of the room.
I want to make a confession that the city made a mistake on my case. They allowed me 38 solar panels on my roof. And it taught me that the panel is incrementally expensive, but the inverter is the killer. So the more panels you have per inverter, the better you do. It's an unnecessary penalty to allow somebody just 12 panels. It's a joke.
Thank you for that. Let's go to the other side of the room. And sir, do you want to try without the mic? And Justin will come over.
When pest control companies tent a house, it's called Vicane, I think. And I just read a report that said that Los Angeles, the greater Los Angeles area, is the only city in the country that is they're concerned about its effect on global warming, because apparently that gas in sufficient quantities contributes significantly to global warming. And now they're saying that Los Angeles is the only city in the country that is actually contributing a significant amount of this gas to the environment. So I just wondered if anybody knew anything about that or could fill us in, because it's the only gas available. So whenever they tent a house, that's what they're using.
I'm not familiar with that, but we can certainly look into it, David, in terms of our city and what policies and procedures we have about it. Thank you for that. Yes, sir. Right. I know there are state incentives presently. David, do we have city incentives currently or not?
And if I may add, a lot of my clients do get negative bills through net metering and whatnot, selling their energy back to the grid. So the city of Pasadena is very good about that. So thanks to the city of Pasadena for their policies there. Thank you.
Thank you. And you know, it's a tricky business where you have long-term purchase contracts, but you want to discourage consumption by your customers, you know, to have conservation. So, yes, sir, in the back.
So I'm trying to understand this negative energy thing. And so let's say we've got all these utilities and they've got long-term contracts, and there's a day that something happens where things didn't come out as expected, and they had to go out on like a spot market and buy. So on one given day, it could be really expensive, and they're going to have to go out of pocket at more than anticipated. But on a day where it's the negative, does that mean what happens? Somebody gives you money to take power?
I think that is what
yes. So
negative pricing means.
Negative pricing literally means someone gives you money to either use electricity or store that.
So if you happen to have a need that day, you're just in luck.
So a lot of there are now grid scale battery storage systems. You might have heard of like Tesla Megapacks, and that if you have a large enough system, you can like basically participate in these markets.
Right. So if you didn't even have a special need that day, but you had the ability to store,
right,
you could make some money and
yes,
fill up your batteries.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take a couple more questions, then we'll do our raffle. Is that Bruce that has his hand up? Or? Yep. Oh, over here. Okay.
Hi, Alan Baer. Interesting talk tonight. In a general sense, not so much specific to Pasadena, but in listening to it, I was thinking about Pasadena. One thing is we have a lot of EVs now. We're going to have more. They're all one way. They can take electricity in, but they can't give it back to the grid when Pasadena needs it. Pasadena is constrained. We can't get more than a certain amount of power from the grid, which is also constrained. But the more batteries we have inside the city, the better. As we have an increasing number of EVs, if they're two-way chargeable, they can give power back to Pasadena during peak times when we need it. There's currently a bill in Sacramento that they're considering requiring EVs to be two-way chargeable. So the more people that get in touch with their representative to encourage them to support that bill, that could help us out, because then our EVs could be part of the solution, not just reducing their charging demand, but also giving a little power back when we could use the boost. Another thing is, I'm thinking of commercial buildings and putting solar on them. I think there's a lot more capacity inside the city of Pasadena than maybe PWP has really considered possible. And of course, one thing when I think about doing that, say at my building, is, well, are those batteries going to be safe for everybody that lives in the building? Would the city rather have me put those somewhere around my building, or would they rather have it over there in the old power plant, or what? Batteries are great, but I was thinking, we don't really need a lot of new tech. Now, of course, there's gravity, but for 50 years, we've had pumped hydro. And Pasadena isn't everywhere, as someone mentioned before. Pasadena is right here, and we just happen to have, now I'm thinking a little bit outside the box, but we have some very tall mountains right there.
Yeah, we do.
And if you've been to the top of Echo Mountain, you know that giant water tank on the top of Echo Mountain? It's not really very big. I mean, and not only that, there's the incline railway, which is this old right-of-way that you could use to put a water line up to that tank. Now, if it's a national park, I'm not sure I support this national park thing. I would love to be able to use these mountains as in the right way as a resource. Echo Mountain I'm using as an example. I think it's probably too small. But consider behind the station, where the station fire is, the road to Mount Lukens. There's a bunch of lots up there where the teepee is.
We take your point that we have to look at other sources. We signed just this year a large geothermal contract. That's another source.
Geothermal's great, but I'm talking about energy storage. Because energy storage is what we need. Pumped hydro to the road to Mount Lukens, where there's all those lots, or to Henniger Flats, where there's a bunch of lots.
Yes.
So could that be used?
Thank you very much. Let me move to just our last couple of questions. Bruce Bailey, you had your...
And so, was I wrong on that?
At the state level.
Sorry, which graph?
You showed a graph that, it went like this. Here's the nighttime where we don't have enough. In the middle of the day, we've got all the solar panel we need to run the whole state.
That's for today, and yesterday, which are very mild days. Once we get to the summer, that's no longer the case. And also in the winter. So in the winter, when we have less hours of sun, and also in the peak like say come July, August, we're still only maybe hitting 70, 60% of our generation coming from renewables.
Okay.
Right now it's spring and fall, we can hit 100%.
So
which
the
is amazing.
key to this then is storage.
Well, and
more
building
panels
more.
and storage
more
at your
panels.
house.
Anywhere.
So could somebody be off the grid then if they had their own batteries and their own solar panels? They can put as much solar on as they needed?
I don't know if we permit that, David. The question is, can you be off the grid and just have your own solar and not participate? Yep, okay. Great. Last question then from the woman right behind you, Bruce, if you could. Thank you.
I'm concerned when I hear all this talk about batteries that we may just be shifting the burden somewhere else. For example, all the EVs in the city that are being plugged into the grid of Pasadena, which is still getting power from coal-fired plants. We can't see it. It's in another state, but there's still carbon emissions that are going into the generation of the power that sort of cancel out some of the value. What I know about present-day batteries is a lot of them use very toxic things, very limited chemicals that are dug out of the earth someplace else where we don't see it, where the environment is damaged permanently, where there are human rights violations, where there's child labor. You know, the whole issue of batteries, I think, has to incorporate consideration of how were we transmitting the generation of those devices someplace else where we can't see it, but it's still damaging the planet. Menifee, for example, just put 43 acres committed to battery storage. I don't know what's on that land now, but it's not going to be the same once they put 43 acres worth of batteries on the property. So what else are we causing by talking about battery power? And I just think that's something that has to go into the equation. I don't have an answer. You probably don't have an answer right off, but we need to be thinking about that sort of thing now, because coal power someplace else, just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not an issue for the planet and for carbon generation someplace else.
I just want to clarify something. The coal power, that is what we're doing in Pasadena. We are not going to buy electricity generated by burning coal. So I'd just like to clarify that. That is one of the points of the climate emergency resolution. As you know, there's been a long-term contract with Intermountain Power in Utah, and they were generating a lot of electricity by burning coal. So that's going to end anyway in 2025 because the contract is expiring, but we're not going to do that anymore. On batteries, I agree with you completely, but it's true that every technology change has something. You've got to be aware of it. There's quite a lot of work being done in battery recycling, so that's encouraging news. I think the problem is that we just have to deal with global warming. We can't ignore it. It's a threat that is right here. And as we find solutions, I agree with you absolutely. We need to not create new problems. Yeah.
Maybe just add Thank you all, and I'll stick around for a little bit if folks have other questions or comments. And can we please thank all of our panelists and Wes and Dr. Yeh. Thank you. Thank you. This is important stuff. I'm sure some of you saw, nobody at City Hall missed this, that the city of LA recently signed a new head of water and power for LA DWP. I saw that mentioned up there, that for over $750,000 a year in compensation. And that really was, got the attention of a lot of people in municipal government, as you can imagine. They came from PG&E. All right, thank you all very much. Thank you.